Christmas Eve in rural Iowa is a kind of quiet you don't get anywhere else. Our farmhouse sat alone at the end of a gravel road, surrounded by frozen cornfields that stretched out flat and empty in every direction. When snow fell, like it did that night, it swallowed sound completely. Even the wind felt muted, like it didn't want to disturb anything. My parents left around 10:30 p.m. for midnight mass in town. I stayed home because I'd come down with a bad cold and didn't want to sit through church coughing. They didn't like leaving me alone, but I was 16, and nothing ever happened out there. They reminded me to lock the doors, left a lamp on in the living room, and promised to be back shortly after midnight. Once their car disappeared down the road, the house felt too big. I watched TV for a while, but the signal kept cutting in and out because of the weather. By 11:15, I shut it off and went to my bedroom. My room was on the second floor, facing the side yard and the fields beyond. Snow drifted past the window in slow, thick flakes, glowing faintly in the moonlight. I was halfway to sleep when I heard singing. At first, I thought it was coming from my head, the way melodies sometimes replay themselves when you're drifting off. But then I recognized the words, "O come, all ye faithful." My eyes snapped open. The house was silent. No radio, no TV, no furnace cycling. The singing was coming from outside. It was faint but clear. A single voice. Male. Calm. Not joyful exactly. More careful, like each word was being placed deliberately. I sat up in bed and listened. The sound wasn't coming from the road. It was closer. Too close. I slid out of bed and crept toward the window, my socks barely making a sound on the carpet. I didn't pull the blinds up fully, just enough to peek through. There was no one in the yard. The snow beneath my window was smooth and untouched. No footprints, no tracks leading from the road or the trees, just clean white snow stretching out into darkness. The singing stopped. For a moment, I felt ridiculous. Maybe it had been the wind. Maybe I'd imagined it. Then the singing started again. Closer, directly beneath my window. I froze. The voice was clearer now, louder, as if whoever was singing had stepped right up to the side of the house. The words carried through the glass, vibrating faintly against it. O come ye to Bethlehem." I stepped back from the window, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. My first instinct was to call my parents, but the idea of moving, even reaching for the phone, felt impossible. I stood there, listening, my breath shallow. Halfway through the verse, the singing stopped abruptly. Not faded, not trailed off. Stopped. I waited. Then came the knock. It echoed through the house, loud and sudden from the front door below. 3 firm knocks, slow, confident. I didn't move. No one ever knocked on our door that late. Not neighbors, not friends, especially not on Christmas Eve. Another knock followed. Same rhythm. "Hello," a man's voice called. Calm, polite. Familiar in the way strangers' voices sometimes are. I backed away from the stairs, my pulse roaring in my ears. The voice didn't sound drunk, or angry, or lost. It sounded patient. "I know you're home," he said. The singing resumed, but not from the front door. It drifted back around the side of the house, back beneath my window. My phone felt like it weighed 100 pounds when I finally picked it up. I called my parents, whispering as soon as my mom answered. I told her someone was outside, that they were singing, that they knew I was home. She told me to lock myself in my room and call the police. As I was dialing, something happened that made my blood run cold. The singing stopped again, and then I heard breathing. Right outside the glass, slow, controlled. Close enough that the window fogged slightly in one spot, as if someone's face was inches away. "I just want to finish the song," the man said softly. I screamed. I don't remember hanging up the phone or how long I screamed for. I remember lights, red and blue, cutting through the falling snow. I remember police voices shouting outside, doors opening, footsteps. By the time anyone searched the yard, there was nothing to find. No man, no footprints. The snow beneath my window was still perfectly smooth, except for one thing. Pressed faintly into the frost on the glass right where the fog had been was the outline of a hand. 5 fingers, spread wide. My parents sold that house the following spring. I still don't listen to Christmas carols anymore, because sometimes when the night is quiet enough, I swear I can still hear someone outside, waiting for me to let them finish the song. Christmas morning always started the same way in our house. I woke up before everyone else, heart racing, convinced that if I didn't hurry, Santa might somehow take the presents back. Our house on Kendrick Road wasn't big, but it felt magical on Christmas. Tinsel draped over door frames, the smell of pine needles from the real tree in the living room, and the faint hum of the electric heater fighting the winter cold. That year, I remember the quiet most of all. It was the kind of quiet that made you feel like the house was holding its breath. I slipped out of bed and padded down the hallway in my socks, careful not to wake my parents. When I reached the top of the stairs, I stopped. There were stockings hanging from the fireplace, 5 of them. I knew immediately something was wrong. There were only 4 of us, Mom, Dad, my older brother Simon, and me. Every year, Mom knitted our stockings herself. They were all different colors, but clearly made as a set. I could tell which one was mine from the uneven stitching near the heel. The 5th stocking didn't match. It hung slightly apart from the others, closer to the edge of the mantle, like it hadn't been given a proper place. It was longer and darker, knitted from deep red yarn that had faded unevenly, as if it was much older than the rest. The wool looked stretched thin, the way fabric does after years of use. I stared at it, my excitement draining away and leaving behind something cold and tight in my chest. I knew it hadn't been there the night before. I'd checked. Twice. I stood there for a long time, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to wake my parents immediately. Another part of me, curious in the way only children can be, wanted to see what was inside. Before I could decide, Simon came down the stairs behind me. "What are you doing?" he whispered. I pointed. He frowned. "That's not mine." Mum came down moments later, tying her dressing gown. Dad followed, yawning. Their smiles faded as soon as they saw the fireplace. "Did you hang that?" Dad asked Mum. She shook her head slowly. "No." We all stood there, staring at the extra stocking. The house felt colder somehow, even though the fire had burned low all night. "It's probably old," Mum said after a moment. "Maybe I took it out by mistake." But she didn't sound convinced. Dad tried to laugh. "Well, whoever it's for, they've been good, apparently." No one laughed with him. Eventually, Mum said we should open the others first. We did, but the usual joy felt muted. I kept glancing at the red stocking, convinced it was watching me. When it was the last one left, Mum hesitated. "Maybe we shouldn't," she said quietly. But Dad had already reached for it. It was heavier than the others. He held it carefully, as if it might tear. When he tipped it upside down, something slid out and landed softly on the carpet. It was a shoe, a small one. Child-sized. Brown leather, scuffed and cracked with age. The laces were missing, and the sole was worn thin at the heel. No one spoke. I remember thinking it looked lonely. Mum's face went completely white. She sank down onto the sofa as if her legs had stopped working. "That's not possible," she whispered. Dad picked up the shoe, turning it over slowly. "What is it?" Mum didn't answer right away. She stared at it like it might move. Finally, she said, "It looks like my brother's." I'd never met my mum's brother. I knew his name, Andrew, but that was it. No photos, no stories, just a silence that settled whenever he was mentioned. "He disappeared," Mum said quietly. "In the winter, he was 6. Dad set the shoe down as if it burned him. "They found it in the snow," Mum continued, her voice shaking. "Just one, this one." The room felt suddenly too small, too full. Dad stood up abruptly. "We're getting rid of it." They wrapped the stocking and the shoe together and took them into the kitchen. Mum lit the fireplace again, even though it was already morning. I watched from the doorway as Dad dropped the stocking into the flames. The wool caught quickly, curling and blackening. When the shoe followed, the smell changed. It wasn't like burning leather. It smelled damp, old, like something that had been buried for a long time. Mom opened all the windows, even though it was freezing outside. The smoke lingered anyway, clinging to the walls and furniture. Christmas went on, but it didn't feel like Christmas anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house creaked softly, settling against the cold. Around midnight, I heard something from downstairs. A faint rustling, like fabric brushing against brick. I held my breath and listened. Then, very softly, I heard a child's footsteps crossing the living room floor. They stopped at the fireplace. I squeezed my eyes shut, pulling the blanket over my head. I didn't dare move. I didn't dare look. In the morning, Mum found something on the mantel. A thin line of ash, shaped like the heel of a small shoe. We never spoke about it again. Mum packed away the Christmas decorations early that year. The fireplace was sealed off the following summer. But every Christmas morning after that, before I come downstairs, I still count the stockings in my head, just to make sure none of them belong to someone who never made it home. Christmas night in Phoenix never felt like Christmas the way it did on TV. There was no snow, no cold breath in the air, just dry desert wind rattling palm leaves and the hum of traffic drifting in from the main road. Still, my mom tried to make it special. She hung plastic icicles from our balcony railing and taped paper snowflakes to the windows of our second-floor apartment. I remember being annoyed that year because I was too old to go to bed early, but Mom insisted Santa wouldn't come if I stayed up. I pretended to believe her because pretending felt safer than admitting I was scared to sleep alone. Dad was working the night shift at the warehouse, so it was just Mom, my little sister Sophia, and me. Sophia fell asleep instantly. I didn't. Around 11 p.m., the apartment went quiet. The TV shut off. The lights clicked out. I lay in bed staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars stuck to my ceiling, listening to the building breathe. Pipes knocking, someone coughing through the walls, a distant elevator bell. That's when I heard footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Not the shuffling steps of someone passing by in the hallway, but deliberate, like someone pacing. Our apartment had thin walls, but I knew those steps weren't inside another unit. They were right outside my bedroom door. I whispered, "Mom?" No answer. The footsteps stopped. Then came a soft sound, almost playful. Ho. 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 It was quiet, barely louder than a whisper, but it froze me instantly. My heart started pounding so hard I thought it would give me away. I held my breath, listening. The laugh came again, closer this time. Ho! 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 I pulled the blanket up to my chin and stared at the dark doorway. My door was open a crack, just wide enough for the hallway nightlight to spill across the carpet. A shadow moved across that light. Something tall. Something round at the top. I wanted to scream, but my throat locked up. My body felt heavy, like the mattress was pulling me down. The shadow stopped right outside my door. Then it leaned in. A face slowly filled the gap. It was Santa. At least, that's what it was supposed to be. He wore the red suit, the white trim, the hat, but everything about him was wrong. The beard wasn't fluffy. It hung in thin, matted strands, yellowed like old cotton. His skin beneath it looked gray and stretched too tight. His eyes were the worst part. Small, watery, and unblinking, like glass marbles pushed into dough. He smiled. Not a friendly smile. Not even a human one. His mouth pulled wide, stretching the beard apart, showing teeth that were too long and too even. I tried to close my eyes, but I couldn't. He leaned closer, his face inches from mine. I could smell him, dust, sweat, and something sour underneath, like old breath trapped in fabric. He tilted his head, listening. That's when I realized what he was doing. He was watching my chest, watching it rise, watching it fall. He whispered, "Good, you're still breathing." I don't know how long he stood there. Seconds felt like hours. My lungs burned, but I was too scared to breathe loudly. Every shallow breath felt like a signal flare. Finally, he straightened up. "Merry Christmas," he whispered. Then he stepped back. I heard the footsteps move away down the hall, slow and heavy again. A door creaked softly, our front door. When I finally screamed, it came out broken and hoarse. Mom burst into my room, flipping on the light. "Luis, what's wrong?" I sobbed so hard I couldn't talk. She checked the apartment. Every room, every window, the balcony. The front door was still locked. Nothing was missing. No footprints. No signs anyone had been there. She told me I'd had a nightmare. I wanted to believe her. But nightmares don't leave marks. The next morning, I noticed something on my bedroom carpet, right where the shadow had stood. A dark, damp footprint. Boot-shaped. Too big to be mine. Mom said it must have been tracked in water. Dad laughed it off when he got home, said someone probably wore a Santa costume in the building and scared me. But later that week, flyers appeared taped near the mailboxes. "Neighbors, please lock your doors. Suspicious person in Santa suit reported in complex." According to the rumors, he'd been seen standing in hallways late at night, watching doors, watching windows. One woman said she woke up and found him standing at the foot of her son's bed, just checking on him. The police never found him. Years passed. We moved. I grew up. I told myself it was all fear and imagination. But even now, I can't sleep with my door open. And every Christmas night, no matter how warm it is, I wake up suddenly, gasping, heart racing, convinced someone is standing just out of sight. Waiting. Watching. Making sure I'm still breathing. In our village, Christmas had rules. Not written ones, not spoken aloud, but rules everyone followed the same way you follow the tide or the weather. You didn't question them. You just did as you were taught. And the oldest rule of all was this: the church bells do not ring after midnight on Christmas. They never had. Not in my lifetime. Not in my father's. Not in my grandfather's either. I was 22 that Christmas, home from Limerick for the holidays. The village hadn't changed. Same stone cottages, same narrow roads, same church sitting on the hill like it had been placed there by God himself and forgotten. Midnight mass ended just before 12. We spilled out into the cold, laughing, wishing one another happy Christmas, the sound of boots crunching on frost. The bells rang then, 12 strong, steady chimes marking the birth of Christ. That was normal. After that, the church went silent. I remember checking my watch when I got back to my parents' house. 12:47 a.m. Ma'am had gone to bed. Da was already asleep in his chair. I poured myself a whiskey and sat by the window, watching fog drift through the street like low smoke. At exactly 1:03 a.m., the first bell rang. It wasn't loud. It wasn't celebratory. It sounded tired, heavy. Dong. I froze, glass halfway to my mouth. Then another. Dong. Slow. Deliberate. Like someone counting something they didn't want to count. By the fifth ring, lights were coming on in the houses along the road. Doors creaked open. People stepped outside in coats thrown hastily over nightclothes, confusion written on every face. By the 13th ring, no one was speaking. 13. The bell stopped. The night felt wrong after that. Too still, as if the village itself was holding its breath. Someone whispered, "That's not right." Someone else said, "Who'd ring it?" The answer came quickly, because it always did. No one's in the church. A few of us walked up the hill together, myself, old Padraig Flynn, and two brothers from the Doyle family. The grass crunched under our feet, frost biting through our shoes. The church doors were locked, same as always. The windows were dark. The bell rope hung slack inside the tower. There was no wind, no animals, nothing that could explain it. We stood there longer than we should have, then drifted back home without saying another word. No one slept much after that. The next morning, Christmas Day, brought the news. Mare Kelleher was dead. She lived alone at the edge of the village, a widow for nearly 40 years. They found her in her bed, hands folded neatly over her chest, face calm. The doctor said it was her heart. Peaceful, he called it. But the timing sat wrong with everyone. Meyer was known for knowing things. Not in a dramatic way, no fortune-telling or curses, but she remembered dates, deaths, old stories no one else did. She'd once told me, years before, that the bells rang when someone left who wasn't meant to leave quietly. I remembered that when they carried her coffin into the church 2 days later. The funeral was simple. The priest spoke softly. The bell rang once, as it should. Then, just as the coffin passed under the tower, the bell rang again. On its own, not pulled, not swung. Just one sharp, hollow ring that echoed across the graveyard. The priest stopped mid-sentence. People looked up. The bell did not ring again. No one mentioned it aloud. That was another rule. But after that year, things changed. The church was locked tighter. Midnight Mass ended earlier. The bells were inspected, repaired, blessed. They never rang after midnight again. But I stayed in the village long enough to hear stories. In 1982, a man swore he heard a single bell at 2 a.m., the night before his brother drowned. In 1991, a woman claimed the bell rang softly, once, before her house burned down. Always once, never 13 again. As for me, I left Ireland years later. Life went on, the memory dulled. Until one Christmas night, decades later, when I visited home again. I was older than my father had been in 1975. The village was quieter now, smaller. After midnight mass, I walked alone, just as I had before. At 1 a.m., my phone buzzed in my pocket. 1:03 a.m., I stopped walking. From the hill above me came a sound I hadn't heard in years. Dong, just once. The phone buzzed again. A message from my sister. Daw's taken a turn. Ambulance on the way. The bell did not ring again. And I knew, with a certainty colder than the winter air, that the rule hadn't been broken. It had only been waiting.